Gaynor has gone to get some copies for us of the ordinance that we're discussing. It is entirely my fault that she's gone over there to do that. I had, because it was my idea to bring the ordinance to the attention of the commission, I did make copies and had them marked with little sticky notes and all kinds of things, and cannot put my hands on them. So Ms. Gaynor's doing a favor for me. So if you'll just bear with us for about 5 minutes, she'll be back and we'll get started. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you. We praise you, God, for this opportunity. We thank for you this day, Lord, and every day is a blessing, God. We thank you for our community that we live in and also the country, God, that we live in, that we can come together and sit around this table as elected officials and representatives of the people and do the city of this business, the business of this city. Father, we just pray that you'll give us wisdom and guidance and direction, Lord, and monitor this meeting today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And I'll just give a little background to where we started at the commission meeting and maybe just give everybody a chance to get warmed up to the discussion. And as we move along, when we get toward the end of our discussion or when we get to a point, to various points, I will ask for public input for those of you who would like to have input or have discussion about traffic calming in Lynn Haven. So everyone will be included. What I brought to the table at the last commission meeting was as you know, from the 2 years ago when I started in this position, one of my big issues in Lynn Haven has been the speeding issue in our city, ranging from most of our neighborhood streets are 25 mile per hour. We have a few that are 30, and our county road is 35. But even our state road, 77, is 35 here through the major part of the city. And I just stay in dismay and horror all the time at the speeds at which people drive. And this is no reflection on our police chief nor the police department. We've discussed the fact that and in my opinion, I agree with the police chief that we do need a traffic division, a group who do nothing but traffic regulation, and hopefully we can address that as we move toward the budget. But in the meantime, what I had asked the commission at the last meeting was I've had several residents to ask me about various places in Lynn Haven where they would like to see stop signs, and I was one of the people requesting them. And 2 years ago, before I decided to run for mayor, I was requesting stop signs on Tennessee Avenue where I live because people were bypassing Highway 77 where the traffic signals are, turning right on 5th Street, then turning left on Tennessee and zooming down our street until they hit 390. So 2 traffic studies were done over the course of 6 years. And finally, I got a stop sign at the end of 6 years as I was moving toward running for mayor. I said all that to say this: there are people all over Lynn Haven since I've become mayor who've asked me over and over, why can't I have a stop sign? And Chris Forehand and his group drew up sort of a map placing some of these stop signs where residents had asked. And I'll bring up the locations as the meeting progresses. But right now, what I was saying is that I thought, in my opinion, the Lynn Haven ordinance for the progression or the procedure for placing a stop sign or considering speed bumps or any of those traffic calming items is quite long and involved. It requires petitions being signed by all the people on the street. It involves traffic studies done by the city, and it's in my opinion, it was just archaic. So I had asked that we just discard it and use the Florida statute, which if you want to look it up, it's Florida statute 316.006, number 2, letter A, and it's only 2 sentences long, and it reads this: Chartered municipalities shall have original jurisdiction over all streets and highways located within their boundaries except state roads, and may place and maintain such traffic control devices which conform to the manual and specifications of the Department of Transportation upon all streets and highways under their original jurisdiction as they shall deem necessary to indicate and to carry out the provisions of this chapter or to regulate, warn, or guide traffic. So that just means in my opinion, that I could come before the mayor and commission and say, look, there are people driving 60 miles an hour on Georgia Avenue, and I would like to request a stop sign at 13th in Georgia, which is what someone, and then we would have the power to do that or not to do that based on, what we think is best, based on what they tell us. So that was my proposal, and that opened the discussion. And I know that Commissioner Friend had requested some time to do some research about what other municipalities were doing, and I know Commissioner, if I put words in your mouth, let me know. Commissioner Russell had said something to the effect of that he didn't think that we should just, drop stop signs anywhere people requested them, that we should give it some more thought as that kind of, and it was kind of a consensus that we needed to talk about this some more by everyone. So with that said, and while we're waiting for the ordinance, I know Ms. Gaynor is working very hard to get that to us. So would anybody like to pick up the discussion, and I'll be quiet and listen for a while.
I'll be glad to start, Mayor, if you don't mind. Just going back to the statute, I wanted to get, and didn't have a chance to call Rob. I was just going to get your opinion on that particular section, because a lot of the research, and if we're talking about just the stop signs as traffic control devices, a lot of this research and everything that I did, it sounds like it speaks to not putting stop signs to slow traffic. So, and I hate to put you on the spot. I apologize. I didn't get to call you right away. But I've read that, obviously, and you pointed it out last time, and that's one of the reasons why I made the motion when I did just for the one, and I do apologize for any unintended consequences.
No problem.
But like even this one FDOT publication that they put out, it says, it speaks to that exactly, and not to that statute, it just says that on occasion elected officials with their true political zero please everyone influence will put in a stop sign.
Could you read that again? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the whole thing.
And I probably should have made copies perhaps, but it just says, so this is like from FDOT and Department of Transportation, and it's just frequent questions, and I think like one of the questions, and from another state I saw this specific question, why can't I have a stop sign? That's not what this one says, but it is in the frequent questions, and it just says, what is the harm in installing an unwarranted traffic control device? And then, without reading every bit of it, it just says, on occasion, an elected official with a true politician's zen to please everyone influence an installation of a traffic device against the advice of the traffic engineer. Then it goes on to say that many elected officials do not realize that there is a national guideline for the installation of a traffic control device, which is the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, so which is at the federal level. So, and just to back up what we were talking about earlier or to mention what you were saying earlier is, I wanted us to take a look at the whole traffic calming policy or traffic control policy, because what I would like to see is as we rework it and as we discuss it today and maybe kick it back over to the city manager and city engineer, I would like to see us perhaps put in or put in the policy so that we could discuss it and use it as something else to calm traffic, would be like a center island narrowing. There's a couple other things. We talked about a roundabout before already, so there's a roundabout that some other folks have done. There's something called a choker, and that's basically where it just narrows the road down. So those are a couple of ideas, and then a speed cushion. I've talked to the chief before, fire chief before, on speed bumps or whatever. And this is called a speed cushion. And the way these are installed is the wheelbase is actually wider so that your emergency vehicles can still go through without having to slow down. But of course, a car with a smaller wheelbase would have to slow down to go over the speed cushion. So then there's the speed hump. And then that's just a few of the ones that, and whatever else we can come up with to put in a policy, and then the traffic circle, so that we can put something in a policy so that it doesn't, so that we look at it as a whole. We're not just isolating, stop signs or whatever. But that was just kind of my thoughts. And then I just add in with this is, on my trip to the MPOAC meeting, I had the opportunity to talk to a local consultant, consults for the TPO. I think he's did a presentation before for FDOT. And I mentioned some of these things to him, and he and I just went over some of that, but he did mention that, yeah, there is studies that say that a stop sign can have the negative effect. And the reason I think it's so important to have a policy is we have to represent everyone, and I think if we put a stop sign here, well, does that mean they're going to go to that stop sign, and then they're going to take a right, and they're going to go down that road, and now what about all the people on that road, And then some of the studies also say that, it becomes a speeding issue. They'll speed to the one, they'll speed to the other. So a lot of other things, and just sharing my thoughts on all that. Other methods, I mentioned already other methods to slow traffic. That's about, no, I just did want to mention this as it relates to Tennessee. One of the things I mentioned to him, and let me say this too, all this in my opinion should fall back to like our engineer, through city manager and engineer, so that they can, and I know it's a long process and we could try to shorten the process, and I know the petitions is like at 60%, maybe we could drop that down, but I think an engineering situation, I think that being in a policy allows a commission to go back and say, well, we have a policy in place, we had some engineering in place, and I think liability-wise, if anything happens in the future, that's something that we've got in place to fall back on. So for Tennessee, just an idea, and I'm not an engineer, but I would talk to the engineer about this particular idea, is what if on 390, because as it becomes 6-lane or whatever, what if we just made it so that there's no through traffic? What if we put up a sign that said no through traffic? Of course, you have an enforcement issue at that point. You'd have to enforce that. But I think that would, because it's a collector road, but I think you've mentioned it's also...
We disagree on that point, but...
Do we?
Yes.
Really?
Go ahead.
You wouldn't want a sign that says no through...
we disagree on it being a collector road. We've disagreed before on that.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But go ahead.
But you think it's more of a cut-through road?
But
we can agree that it's a cut-through road.
But I would like to move away from Tennessee Avenue simply
Well,
because that's where
but
my house is.
I understand,
but
I understand, yes, ma'am. But I will say that during my golf cart discussion, I talked to a lot of folks on there, and they all have the same thoughts that you do. I'll just say the majority of the ones that I spoke with. So that was just that one, because I know that, and I've talked to other residents that have told me that they do that. They use that road to get around 77. So that's just a thought there. But I guess my only point to that is I think we need some engineering as well. I think that needs to be in the policy somewhere so that we're not just arbitrarily making these decisions.
Are you talking a traffic engineer or who are we talking about? An engineer to decide
just
about?
maybe our current engineer.
Like our
Panhandle Engineering or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For traffic calming?
For traffic calming, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I've seen that in other policies. And I think that's actually part of the whole federal policy, that you'll do some of that.
Just going back on, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, ma'am, I'm
going back on my original, as when I was a citizen, just approaching the city of Lynn Haven to try and get a stop sign on Tennessee Avenue, and not just for traffic control, but to keep traffic from cutting through, but to slow down the traffic that was coming down my street. It was a long and arduous process. And the first time that it happened, I came to the city manager, who was then Mr. Lynch, and was told that I would never get a stop sign. Just that was the process. And then I came back again to the commission meeting, and then they told me they would start. It took 6 years to get through the process. And so I understand the frustration of the other residents. And so I respectfully listened to what you just said about the different sources saying that, the stop signs could be more dangerous, but you didn't really cite what they were. There was an FDOT letter from, I'm assuming, a staff member at FDOT who made some kind of comment about zealous political officials. But I am zealous, and I am zealous on behalf of the people who call me. Right now my phone is full. It has been all week, and I answered and it fills back up. And the Florida statute is so simple. And one of the things that I get so bogged down with in government is that we make everything so more difficult than it has to be. The Florida statute is 2 sentences long. People know what's happening on their little street. This is not like New York City. These are tiny little neighborhood streets. And I did go speak with our police chief before I said I was going to start fussing about wanting stop signs. And our police chief told me, he said that his only issue with it is that he didn't have the manpower to, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that he didn't have the manpower to monitor each of these stop signs. But what I said to him, and I mean, and I don't mean it to sound funny or humorous, but it is kind of, it doesn't take everybody getting ticketed every time they miss the stop sign. Most people will slow down and stop when they see a stop sign, and Chief Reamer doesn't have to even write me a ticket. He could just turn the light on when he saw me getting, like I was rolling through this, and the fear and trepidation would set in, you know. So we don't have to necessarily have somebody monitoring every stop sign. Most of us as good citizens and residents of the town, when we see a stop sign, we know we're supposed to stop. And so I feel very passionate about it. But I just don't put a lot of reliance on when people say studies show unless they can tell me what the study is, with no disrespect.
Sorry.
Can I chime in for just a
Yeah, sure. But just if you don't mind, just follow up. No disrespect taken at all.
Absolutely.
And I didn't bring it, and I could have. But I mean, there is, and I understand what you're saying. Their study says. I mean, everybody can say that. But the last thing I would say, and I'll move on. Is
All you want.
I don't disagree with the interpretation of the statute, and it is simple, but it's your interpretation of the statute. And that's no disrespect, but you know, someone else can read that and read it totally different. And the last thing I forgot to bring up is there was actually a lawsuit in Florida versus Ingram, and the defendant was, and basically what it was is he ran a stop sign. Now this is on a private road, and private road, from my understanding, private road and public road are one and the same, but he ran a stop sign, and basically he was able to prove that they didn't do their due diligence to put up the stop sign, and he was found not guilty. So I'm just saying that we just need to do our due diligence. Is my opinion that we need to do our due diligence, whatever that encompasses, engineering or policy, so that we meet whatever guidelines so that we don't get in that type of situation. Sorry.
Oh, no, perfect.
Thank you.
Commissioner Barnes?
When I look at the statute that you just quoted, there's something that sticks out to me, and it says, which conform to the manual and specifications of DOT. All of the policies that I have looked at, and I've looked at several from Panama City, Bay County, other municipalities, all use the federal guidelines, which is this right here. This federal guideline specifically talks about that there should be an engineering study or an engineering judgment that needs to be conducted to keep the guesswork out of, okay, let's throw a stop sign here, put one here, that type of thing. I think we need to make sure that we do have a policy that provides the data to support the necessity of a stop sign. People are going to speed regardless. And there's nothing, I mean, they speed in my neighborhood as well. And, but I think we need to have a policy. I think we need to follow the policy that's outlined here in the federal guidelines. It seems to be working for everybody else, so I don't see why it can't work for us. When I look at these policies, the language is verbatim as to what the guidelines are set. So I know you don't like studies, and I understand your feelings about that.
Oh, I do like studies if they're needed. If it's a valuable study. If it's just a study to study, we don't need a study to study.
Yeah, well, I don't think this is a study just to have a study. I think this is a study to support if the data is there to support the needs of what needs to be taken care of. So that's my opinion on that particular one.
So how many cities in Bay County have the federal guidelines for stop signs as their ordinance? Which cities in Bay County did you find?
I mean, you got Panama City.
They don't have their own ordinance. They just use the federal guidelines for.
And that's my point. They all use the same federal guidelines. The language is verbatim in every single one of them.
So they have the same ordinance in each of these cities, word for word for the document that you have. That's their ordinance for placing a stop sign or a speed bump?
This is it.
You're positive? Springfield, Parker, Cedar Grove, Panama City? That's their ordinance.
That's it.
So why does Lynn Haven have something different now then?
Lynn Haven doesn't. This is the policy right here. It's the same language.
As the federal policy?
It is. Exact same language.
I think what the statute says,
I disagree. I don't think that's accurate.
I think what the statute says for Florida is it will go back to the federal policy. I think that's what it says, because I think the federal policy says any state municipality uses the federal as a blanket
As a
guideline.
guideline.
As a guideline.
But the Lynn
Right.
Haven ordinance is not the federal policy, the one we have on the book right now.
Well,
This is
Yeah.
our policy and procedures. It's the exact same language.
So he has the copy we could all, that we've been looking for the last, no, we all have a copy, but we don't have it on the table in front of us, is what I'm
oh,
saying.
no. Yeah, I've got a copy.
More than welcome to look at it.
My concern is arbitrarily putting stop signs. You know, I agree with you. I've had phone calls. I could list. I've got Ms. Tennell, Roy Lister, Chris Davis. I've had several people call me in the last couple of days wanting speed bumps and stop signs, and some of them are friends like Roy Lister. And even though I personally feel like New York needs one because of what we've done with 390, and now that they've got the concrete barrier on 390 where you can't turn left, except for you can't turn left on Florida. You have to turn on New York. So everybody cuts through on New York. My concern is if we put a red light or a stop sign at 13th in New York like Roy Lister wants, all we're doing is moving that traffic to Georgia. They're going to turn on Georgia and bolt up Georgia.
Okay.
So I want to see it fixed. I just don't know the answer. Because if we do it on New York, they transfer to Georgia. Now there's a wreck on Georgia. Next thing you know, we've got a lawsuit because somebody says some lawyers figure out, hey, you put a stop sign at New York and 13th, and that's what caused the traffic move here. So I don't know the answer, but I do think we have to have some kind of policy in place to state this is why we put it there. That way we've got something to fall back on.
So am I hearing that everybody's content with the policy we already have? Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm not saying that policy is the right policy. I just say we have to have something.
No, that's why I suggested that we have the workshop so that we can work through the policy and say, and like I said, and I didn't mean to get off on the stop sign thing. My main voice today wanted to be, let's look at the whole policy as a whole and incorporate some of these other control devices
Sure.
into our policy, because I don't think we have those today.
So since one of you have the copy that we all needed here, could we possibly get someone to get us all a copy?
Yeah,
and then we could
mine's
start?
got all my notes. Does yours
Yeah,
not
mine's
have
there a
notes?
clean copy?
No, mine's got notes on it too.
Thank you. Anyone else want to make any comments about what we've discussed thus far? I guess my question would be then, if there is this feeling that the stop signs should not be placed at, then why in the world did, at the last meeting, one get approved on my street?
I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that we need to have a procedure in place. And I think part of this procedure is talking to the police chief and getting information from him. I certainly, because I do believe there needs to be one in New York. I think that we need to probably have one on 5th, on the east side of 5th, because on 5th Street, we have the same problem you have.
Mm-hmm.
They come off the bridge, they take a right at 5th, they go down to Illinois, they shoot down to Illinois to get to the country club. You've got the same problem going down your side of 5th. But I think that we have to have a procedure in place. I don't think we should just say, I want one here, I want one here, I want one here.
And I don't think
Yeah.
that's what, in fact, I know that's not what I was suggesting. But what I was suggesting is that when we have a resident who comes before the commission, as I did as a resident, and say, my street is a problem, would you consider putting a stop sign here so that people won't do this? I'm just not sure what we need to study about that. I mean, the people who live on the street know what's happening, and you can, I'm
Well,
just
but I think in that
confused.
respect, you need to do a traffic count to see how many vehicles are traveling in that direction. And if it doesn't meet the guidelines, then it doesn't warrant a stop sign. I mean,
That's where I disagree.
And all I'm saying is yes, I agree with you. The residents probably think or know that they need a red light or stop sign there. But they don't know what it's going to do to the street next to them. You can't put a stop sign here to help this person, knowing that it's now going to negatively affect this person. And that's why I say that we have to have some kind of study or something done to determine that if we put a stop sign here, how is it going to negatively affect the house on the next street over? Because it's obviously going to happen in New York and Georgia is a prime example. You put a stop sign in New York, every bit of that and I'm guilty. I turn on New York. And of course I don't speed, but I turn on New York when it's a red light. And what's going to happen is when you put a stop sign there, I'm going to turn on Georgia. And that's just the nature of human beings. Of course, I don't speed, but people are going to speed. That's my concern.
It's rain.
Right.
So, but, I think we need to do it. It's just a matter of how we go about doing it.
So Commissioner Friend and Commissioner Barnes both commented that you have notes on the ordinance, so maybe you could share with us what you've seen in the ordinance that you like or don't like while we're...
Yeah, well, my notes were actually what I've already shared about that. Well, going into it...
Well, I meant our ordinance, like the...
Yeah, our ordinance. That's what I'm saying. My notes were just basically things like that I talked to about with the consultant down south. But no, I would point out that I think could be reworked is the petition, and it being a 60% threshold. I think that's pretty high. I've had residents tell me for speed bumps that they went out and they tried to knock on so many doors and they could never get to that number of 60%. And then I think the application says that if you don't get to that percent, then it's basically too bad.
And there's a time constraint on it as well.
There's a time constraint, and there's all that in there. So that's where I'm saying, I don't know if we're prepared to go through it line by line, but I would like to think that, between the city manager, maybe city engineer, they're hearing what we're saying today, and they could take it away and we can continue to share about the policy, what we like, what we don't like, and they could take it away and create the new policy and bring it back to, encompass everything that we're talking about. So those are the main things that I pointed out of our current policy is I could see the frustration. I've never utilized the policy personally, but I could see the frustration in the current policy. And then again, my main focus was I wanted to entertain adding additional control devices in the policy to cover everything.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last.
I'm just saying my main focus on it was that I wanted to bring additional ideas to incorporate into the policy for additional control devices, not just stop signs, but some of the other things that I mentioned.
The speed bumps?
Well, yeah.
Or the soft speed bumps you were speaking
Yeah, like a choker, for instance. Choker, where it narrows the road down, because in talking to the consultant down south, a lot of what controls speeding on a road is the narrowing of the road. Mm-hmm. He said even putting up some bushes along the side of the road, believe it or not, will actually slow down traffic. I don't know for a fact, but I just assume on Mosley, you have the turn right there on the other side of the school. I'm thinking that's probably to slow down traffic before you get to the residential area. So those type of things is what I'd like to see us maybe put into a policy for consideration, so that the residents have more options to come to us once they get a policy in their hand. They'll say, well, I want a speed bump, or I want this, or I want that. We could say, well, okay, a roundabout's very expensive, so maybe a roundabout's not going to work, but maybe the speed cushion would work. Again, just options, and we're not the first one that's ever done this. There's a lot of different policies out there that incorporate a lot of different types of control devices.
And I have also spoken with the city engineer as with the past city manager about as we're paving and as the city is going into the new paving process and our new paving plan, that they could add some of these, construction type additions, the roundabouts or the just having a median with shrubbery that you have to drive around.
All of those type of engineering techniques are what slows down traffic. So.
Thank you for the copies.
You got one?
Yeah, I've got one. Thank you.
Thank you.
But again, so no one, just to clarify, because, and I don't mean to be redundant, but we can't talk about this to each other in private, so I want to say it out loud. Nobody would be in favor of doing away with this cumbersome document and just having the Florida statute in place in the city. I'm reading that none of you would be happy with that.
No, ma'am.
The two sentences are too simple.
Well, I think they're a matter of interpretation.
It's so simple when it says that the commission has the power to indicate and to carry out the provisions of this chapter or to regulate, warn, or guide traffic. There's really no other way that you could interpret that. That's just what it says. If a resident, if Mrs. Tennell, which she's talked to me before about Georgia and Virginia, comes in and says, do you mind my using you? I'm sorry. She comes into a commission meeting and she says to me, I would like to see a stop sign at this intersection because every day cars come by. I'm afraid they're going to run over my dogs. I'm afraid they're going to run over me. They splash water in the ditch. People are going down my street doing 50 miles per hour. And she could come and petition the commission. We talk about it. It might be that we send the city engineer or the public works director or the police over there to watch that corner for a day or two. But I mean, we don't have to have a full-fledged, expensive traffic study to implement the Florida statutes. That's where I'm coming from, but if I don't have traction for that, that's what I'm saying.
Well, but see, but the other part of that, though, is if a person comes in and say, well, I've got all these cars coming down my street. Well, all these cars may simply be 2 cars. So you've
I just give people more credit than that.
Well,
Well, yes, ma'am.
I do too. And I mean that respectfully, but I just give people more credit than
Right,
that.
this is what I like, and I can appreciate that. But now we got, this resident comes up, says, I want that. What you gonna do about the next 3 that come up and say, why'd you put a stop sign there? I don't want a stop sign there. And that's why I think we, as a collective body of elected officials, sit down and try to work out a policy that would blanket all of the residents and take all the considerations into, when we make policies. Because I just think that you could have that,
Well, since we have 30 minutes, could we start with the beginning of the policy and see what we have here that we like? Would that be a good place to start?
Sure, but did Ms. Tender did you have something? We kind of,
No, I'm into this too, and
Jump
what I
in.
have to talk about won't take very long at all.
A suggestion, you discuss that, and my thing about worrying about the streets next to it, a solution to that would be is if you decide you want to put a stop sign up, you send a letter out to every house within a half-mile radius of that and ask their opinion. And if they don't come complain about it,
but you won't get the data that you need to support it, because they're not going to return the letter. That's if we could send Roy out there, but we've got all the equipment to do it in-house. It's just a matter of laying the equipment out, counting the cars. If the cars meet that threshold, then we act upon it. We say, yeah, you get a stop sign. If it doesn't meet it, then they don't get the stop
no,
sign.
my concern is not, and this refers to traffic count, where I would be more inclined to want to know the speeds of the vehicle.
And this is
Yeah,
also
yeah.
about
And-
speed bumps, not traffic, not stop signs.
Yeah,
Bobby,
exactly.
doesn't that equipment that we have, doesn't also record the speeds as well?
It does? Okay.
no, but I would say that the speed is, in some of the other policies that I've looked at, speed is one of the criteria, yes. And they measure the speed, and that's part of the justification for putting in a speed hump or a roundabout.
I mean, we don't have to spend money to do this. We've got the personnel and the equipment in-house to do it. We just need to simply say, put it out.
But I think going back to sending out flyers or whatever, I think that was the purpose of the petition, so that the individual resident would go out and knock on doors and say, hey, I'd like to have a speed bump here, what about you? And then that way,
but I'm not sure-
the
I'm not
commission
sure.
would say, well, we know that 60% of the people on that road wanted a speed bump, so yeah, okay.
And very few people are comfortable to go down the street
don't
knocking
disagree.
on doors.
Yes,
It's not safe, especially for women, to do that.
I don't
And
disagree with
And
that
for
at
the
all.
elderly too. I
don't
can't see
disagree with that at
asking
all.
somebody.
I'm not so sure I'm
But I'm just
comfortable
saying
putting it
that's-
off on the citizen to
Yeah.
do it when it's just a matter of
agree.
Xeroxing some letters and sending them. And but
Totally agree.
my philosophy is this: if I notify you and you don't come complain, I'm sorry. If you're not going to get involved, I'm sorry. You're a citizen and your opinion matters, but if you're not going to give me your opinion, then I can't take it into consideration.
Yeah, I understand that, but you're not going to get a good response. You're not going to get a good representation,
But we've made the effort.
Well, yeah, but the effort needs to be on the neighborhood. I mean,
And it bothers me that our policy says that we have to have 5 crashes before we can determine that a stop, we have to have 5 people in a crash in an intersection before we, and how many traffic lights are installed after you see the little signs where someone's lost their life?
Yeah,
you
and
know?
I don't
mean,
disagree with you at all.
And that's a federal policy.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I've had those discussions with FDOT after TPO meetings, yes.
just-
Because the one on 390, I mean, at Sports Complex, but anyway.
But anyway, my last comment, and I won't say any more, I understand, I see where it's going, that we're going to have I'm assuming that we would like to have staff look at this and make some recommendations, but my real issue with this is that Florida statute gives us the power in our small little city to control our own destiny, to decide what intersections we think are dangerous, that people can come to us and expect us to act on their behalf, but instead we keep a cumbersome document which is mostly about speed bumps, and I don't like speed bumps because they do interfere with emergency vehicles. A stop sign does not. Just like the emergency vehicles run the red lights, they can run a stop sign. That's how they do it. But I just think this is a cumbersome policy that is preventing us making our city safer, and we could do it so quickly, but as usual, government gets in the way, and that's just my opinion. And I'm done with my speech and my soapbox, and it looks like we're going to have staff looking at this cumbersome policy.
Whatever road we're talking about tonight, perhaps the commission need to say to the Public Works Director, go ahead and put the equipment out there, get the data, bring it back, let's see what we're looking at, and then we could take the necessary steps based upon what we have here already in place.
Do we have that many machines to
Bob,
put
how
out
many
at
machines
everyone
you
that
have?
people are requesting stop
You got
signs?
one machine,
Move it around.
you just have to move it around. I mean, that's just,
How long is a good time to get a study?
we've done them, 30 days before one time?
Oh, my.
They just did it one
3
day.
days.
They
3
just did
days,
it
I'm
one day
sorry.
on my street.
3
Yeah.
days.
Okay,
The only other thing that
okay.
I would add in updating our policy is some of the policies had a flow chart, and I know we've talked about flow charts. We like flow charts, so that's just one other thing that I'd like to add. I think a flow chart makes it easier for everybody to understand on which way to go.
Okay, so unless anyone else at the table has a comment to make about the traffic calming, then if I could put it in these words, that we would have our city manager, our city engineer, and our public works director, and the police chief and the fire chief, because he was involved in my traffic study, the fire chief was. They would get together and look at this policy and see what they could do to make it more simple or to make it more effective, and then bring it back to the commission for more discussion. Is that agreeable with everyone?
It's perfect.
Or we can,
I do like the suggestion. I mean, if you've got specific roads, and I do, we could go ahead and direct them to start doing the traffic counts now. That way, at least
Okay.
we can get the ball rolling on some of
Okay.
the, on some of the stop signs.
one would be 5th Street and Virginia, that intersection. Another is 13th and Georgia. That's where people are cutting off Highway 390. Another is Iowa and 17th, which is near the Kane Griffin Park, where children are crossing there. Another is Colorado and 10th. That is a street where people are cutting off of 390 and going down Colorado to Country Club and other areas, and I've had a lot of the mothers there complaining. So those are the main ones that have been brought to my attention over and over and over again. The
What was the
second
second
one?
one?
13th in Georgia.
Thank you, sorry.
13th in Georgia. And I would just, I still feel strongly, backing up to this one other item at the last commission meeting when I was trying to bring this forward, that one member of the commission made a motion to approve 12th Street in Tennessee on my street, and there was no traffic study done. I mean, it's hypocritical that we would go ahead and do that and not do these others. Not you're hypocritical, it was hypocritical we did it as a board.
I'll speak.
And I've had numerous calls and emails thanking me that 12th Street stop sign has been put there, that it has helped tremendously. But then I've had an equal number of calls from people, as I said at the last meeting, that have said, oh, well, the mayor got the stop sign on her street, where's mine? So, that's where I was on that.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Start there. Put the traffic count out there at 12th in Tennessee, and
Yeah, I got 4 different areas.
start with that one first.
Is that okay with everyone?
Well, the stop sign's already there on 12th in Tennessee,
Okay.
but you can still do a study if you want, but,
I've got New York and 12th, and then also, it's not an intersection, but I've had complaints of speeding down Redbird Lane.
What's the name of that road?
Redbird,
Redbird.
it's back there behind, thank you, behind Walmart.
And it goes without saying, though, in your group of discussion to consult, obviously, the city attorney on his interpretation of not only the, make sure everything falls in line with what we're supposed to do with the state and federal level.
Absolutely, and from staff's point of view, I would like input from y'all as well as we make this a moving document.
Any other comments from the board about this topic? Did anyone from the public want to comment on this? Yes, sir. Ma'am, sorry. Sir.
Turn around so I can see him.
And if you could keep your comments as close to the 3-minute time limit as possible in case there are others who
Yeah, it
wish
won't
to
take
speak.
long.
Thank you so much.
My name is William Carr, 1500 Massachusetts. And I refer to the state statute, which the words that stick out to me are which conform to the manual and specifications of the Department of Transportation. One thing I have not heard mentioned here is the Department of Transportation manual, which I pulled off their website, 2015, which is entitled Florida Intersection Design Guide. 5.2, significant references. The following reference documents govern the design of signs and markings for intersections in Florida. Number 1, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD, as described in Chapter 1, establishes national standards that promote uniformity and facilitate driver comprehension of traffic control devices. Part 2 of the MUTCD describes signs, and Part 3 covers markings. 5.4, same manual, general requirements for signs and markings. Part 2 and 3 of the MUTCD prescribe requirements governing the shapes, sizes, colors, placement, and other design details for signs, markings appropriate for intersections. If you go to the manual, the MUTCD that they're talking about, under 2B.07, multi-way stop applications, the decision to install multi-way stop control should be based on an engineering study. Down in C, minimum volumes. The vehicular volume entering the intersection from the major street approaches, total of both approaches, which is the major and the minor, averages at least 300 vehicles per hour for an 8 hours on average day. That's 2,400 vehicles going through that intersection on all streets. The combined vehicular, pedestrian, bicycle volume entering the intersection from the major street approaches, total of both approaches, averages at least 200 units per hour for the same 8 hours. You can only do this on an 8-hour average. You can't stick it out there for 3 days and come up with 2,400 vehicles. It says here, if you can't do that, then you reach the 80%. If you go to section 2B.04, which is right-of-way for intersection, number 2, engineering judgment should be used to establish intersection control. The following factors should be considered: vehicular, bicycle, pedestrian volumes on all approaches, number and angle of approaches, approach speeds, sight distance available on each approach, and reported crash experience. If you move down to number 5, it says yield or stop signs should not be used for speed control. 2B07 contains provisions regarding the applications of the multi-stops. Once the decision has been made to control an intersection, the decision regarding the appropriate roadway to control should be based on engineering judgment. In most cases, the roadway carrying the lowest volume of traffic should be controlled. A yield or stop sign should not be installed on the higher volume roadway unless justified by an engineering study. The state of Florida Department of Transportation says that the MUTCD is the requirements for placement of stop signs. If you do anything other than what is listed in that MTCUD, in my opinion, you violated state statute because it specifically states which conform to the manual. And I told you which manual that the Department of Transportation uses to control intersections.
And I thank you for your comments, and I would say also, if you look even more carefully at that, When they talk about roads, they talk about that in a municipality, that the municipality has control over those streets within their municipality's city limits other
Right.
than,
If-
I didn't finish, other than state roads. State
If-
roads, we don't have that control.
But you
We do
still
over our
have to
city.
conform to
I would
the
disagree with you, but
specifications
thank you very
of
much.
the Department of Transportation. One
Thank
last
you.
thing. That
Time.
stop sign that you put up is a $22 stop sign on 12th Street.
I didn't put it up.
Well,
Go
whoever
ahead.
put it, you had it put up. What you've done there is you have a $4,000 radar, solar-powered speed sign 100 feet from that intersection. You've made that totally useless.
Thank you for your opinion, sir. I appreciate it very much. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Libby Tennell. I live at 505 Virginia Avenue. And if you want to see the speeders, you need to come park in my driveway. They go up and down 5th Street like crazy. Even the school buses do it. And at night, Miss Judy there, she says she hears them going back and forth. And it's all the time. And you know, I've seen children out there, and I've told them that they better not be out there on the 5th Street because they could get run over. And you really have to watch it. And I wish y'all would put a speed something there and catch those people. Y'all can park in my driveway. I don't even care.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have a comment or question? And then we have one other topic for our workshop. Okay, thank you so much. It's been a very spirited discussion, and I'm sure we'll move forward and make some good decisions. Thank you, everyone. Ms. Tender, I believe you had the next item for the workshop, and if you want to go ahead with that.
Yes,
Excuse me, Commissioner Tender, not Ms. Tender. Sorry.
I did bring up a point where I wanted to have a resolution passed regarding donations, private donations to the city. And I've since kind of diluted that resolution thought. But there are a few things about, there we go. But there are a few things about private donations, monetary donations to the city that I feel are very important. Our city manager had our director of finance run a record, and since 2000, the last 16 years, the report shows that we've had over almost $400,000 donated to the city. But it's not accurate at all, because I've been told that only up until recently, all the donations have been documented. So my concern with all this that I have been told is we allow vendors that we give work to donate thousands of dollars to the city to be used wherever we feel necessary. My thought on this is I would like to have something set where we accept, I don't have a problem accepting donations from companies or even vendors with a couple stipulations. Number one, I think every single donation the city gets should have the amount, who it's from, what they want the donation used for. That, to me, is a huge, huge thing. And I think everybody that donates should be listed. I also think that donations should be open for public record. I think anybody should be able to walk in and say, I want to see who's donated the last $10,000 for this or for that. I think that should be public information. My other feeling about this, and somebody said something to me that really made me rethink about it, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have vendors donating to the city if our bidding process is in place. And not only if it's in place, that it is fair for everybody, and they're not buying their business from us, but I think the bidding process should be open to the public. I think it should be transparent, as sure as I'm sitting here. And I think it should be public, made public when the bidding is going to take place. And I think how we judge who gets the opportunity to bid on work is vital. Because I have to honestly say, even before I decided to run for office and when I would sit out here in this audience, the thought through my head 9 times out of 10 was, oh my God, there goes another 200,000, there goes another 300,000. And it was always to the same people over and over. So for me, you know, I'm not even going to request a resolution because I think everybody has the right to give. I saw many entries, people donating dog food, things of that nature. I think that's wonderful, and I think the community to get involved is great. But there are also many, many, many entries that say Mr. Walk-in. Well, I don't know Mr. Walk-in, but he's given this city a lot of money. And I think it's vital that we start to maintain that it should be transparent. The person's name should be there. Nothing should be written on a slip of paper. I think it should all be something that anybody could walk in and say, I'd like to see the list of donations that took place this month. And as far as the bidding process goes, I'd love to entertain that too, but that's just my thought. I don't know if anybody feels the same way, but I think it's very, very important to the individuals that would like to know.
Thank you. I think those are valid concerns. Does anyone from the commission want to comment on Ms. Tender's, Commissioner Tender's concerns?
I guess I don't, the only comment I'd make is, what would you do with an anonymous? You know,
There shouldn't be any anonymous donations.
So you would turn down the anonymous donation that they just had at the city for the track that's going to go at the field out there, which is multi-millions of
I don't think there should
dollars.
be any anonymous donations.
Really?
I don't. If they want to put, if a family
But
or
I guess
somebody wants to make a donation, it should have a name attached to it.
Why?
Because there's ulterior motives usually when people want to do anonymous
Why?
in government.
How do we know that, though?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
If there's
speculation.
no
and
smoke, you don't look for the
Hold on a
fire.
second. That's a speculation and an assumption. And I'd like to agree with the mayor that I don't think everyone has evil intentions or, I think, so then let me back up, I mean, because we can get into a philosophical discussion if we want, but let me just make sure what we're discussing. Are we not going to look at a giving policy? Are you taking that off the table? We're not asking for a policy for giving now?
Well, now, I would entertain a policy for accepting donations, sure, but I just figured it wouldn't be seconded, so why bother?
Well, I found it interesting that what you said about that we had $400,000 donated to the city over a period of how many years?
16.
16 or 17 years without a name attached. Did it say anonymous, or we just don't know?
No, nothing says anonymous.
So this was
But they
just...
used to take notes, and if somebody
Okay.
walked in, a lot of the money comes from leisure services, and even leisure services has walk-ins, and they would just write Mr. Walk-in.
Okay.
Well, I'm not saying it's a man,
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything like that.
Right.
I'm just saying that the system has not been, it's just not been kept.
There's not been a record kept.
Yeah, there's not a record.
And the other question that I had that I wanted to refer to the city attorney based on something that you just said as well, concerning the bidding process. Now, and it's a fairly simplistic process, I think, a sealed bid from qualified bidders. So my question to the attorney is, once sealed bids are submitted, the vendors or contractors or whoever have been qualified, and there's a day when these bids are opened, I think is what Commissioner Tender is referring to. Is there anything that would preclude that from being announced and open to the public?
No, my understanding is that's how it works right now. I mean, when the bids are accepted, there's actually a public opening of the bids, where all the envelopes are open and the bids are publicly announced. Anybody who wants to come.
I don't think we've been great about advertising that, I think is what she's probably, because I don't recall seeing it advertised any place when we're opening bids, and I think that's what she's bringing up, that the public is not aware of when this happens. So maybe that's something we could look at it being more transparent. Is that?
Well, normally, it's advertised in the newspaper under the legal section, and you get a bid tabulation sheet that lets you know specifically what the outcome of the bid was, which is a public document, so anybody can come pull it.
I don't think she was disputing that. I think what she's saying, if I may put words in your mouth, what I heard you say is that you think that the public should be made, that it should be more transparent. In other words, if it is just in a little tiny legal section of the paper that there's going to be a bid open, maybe we could be a little more transparent. It could be on the city website that bids will be opened, or maybe it could be announced at this commission meeting, there's going to be a bid opening on this date. Just there's so many different ways that we can get information out, and if it's not, there's no reason why it couldn't be legally, then maybe that's just something we could work at so that it would be more transparent to the public. Is that what you're asking for?
That's my whole thing, transparency.
Okay. We are, anybody else have comments about Commissioner Tender's request? At this point, I think we've sort of reached an end of what we wanted to discuss at the workshop. Does anyone from the public have a comment that you'd like to make about either of the topics that we've discussed today in the workshop? And it appears not. I would like to express my thank yous to the commission for listening to me. I know that I can be quite passionate about wanting things to be more simple than they are. I did not mean to be offensive to anyone if I was, but I still don't see why we can't adopt a 2-sentence policy over the old one, so I'll end with that one. And hope everybody has a great afternoon. Our commission meeting starts in 4 minutes, and we invite you all to stay, and this workshop is adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies.